And now angry protesters have staged a mass march in London, voicing their outrage over deaths in the Grenfell Tower fire. The demonstrators are now picketing the BBC headquarters in London. They said the state broadcaster has failed to give an unbiased coverage to the fire incident that police say has left 30 people dead thus far. Protesters say police are hiding the exact death toll, which some reports say is more than double that official figure. The police say that the death toll could rise as many of the injured are in critical condition and many others still remain unaccounted for. Pressure is mounting on British Premier Theresa May over the fire, with former Cabinet Minister Michael Portillo criticizing the Premier for failing, quote, to show humanity towards the families of the victims. Have a listen.
Alas, Mrs May was what she's been for the last 5 or 6 weeks. That is to say, she wanted an entirely controlled situation in which she didn't use her humanity. So she met in private with the emergency services, a good thing to do, no doubt, but she should have been there with the residents, which is what Jeremy Corbyn was. And, you know, he was there hugging people and being natural with them. The Prime Minister would have been shouted at by the residents, but, you know, she should have been willing to take that.
Because the mayor was, of course, London Mayor certainly
And Portillo's comments come as the British Prime Minister has also faced harsh criticism from the public and the media, with many saying that the rescue efforts were not adequate. May has, however, promised to hold a public inquiry into the London fire, expressing her sorrow in a televised statement after meeting with emergency services. And joining us out of London for more on the story is Mr. Tony Gosling, investigative journalist. Hello, Tony, and thanks for joining us here. It's a tragedy. We know people feel that it hasn't been addressed post-fire and pre-fire. Your thoughts, please.
Well, actually, I'm in Bristol, but I am a Londoner, so I've been following this very closely, this story. Today, we've heard about the starting of a public inquiry into this. I think we need to look very carefully at the law, because the law was changed on public inquiries a month before the 7/7 London bombings. And it means that the government minister is going to be managing that public inquiry. This is really not good enough, because the judges, the legal profession, the judiciary need to have independence from government. Of course, if a government minister is managing an inquiry, that government minister will be making sure that certain things which could point at them as an individual, or at the Prime Minister of the day, or at top civil servants, that may not come out in the inquiry. And we've seen this in previous government inquiries here in Britain. So all the campaigners need to keep a very close eye on that, how independent that is. But the evidence here in Britain is pointing towards this company Harley Facades, and the company was actually involved in the use of what was apparently an environmentally friendly insulation, but it wasn't fireproof, and they saved apparently £5,000 on the entire nearly £10 million renovation by using this material as part of the cladding. Now look, the local MP, David Lammy, or one of the local MPs, is talking about corporate manslaughter. It's not good enough that people can go jetting off on their holidays and not face personal private prosecution and massive fines and imprisonment, whilst people have lost their loved ones in this neglect. And it is neglect. People aren't just sad and upset about this, they're extremely angry, because all the warning signs were there before the fire took hold on Wednesday morning.
But Tony, doesn't London have strict building codes? I mean, we know that there wasn't a sprinkler system there that should have been activated, it should have been present. We know that there wasn't a fire alarm in that building. Aren't these illegal under fire code law?
Well, you would certainly have thought, I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but you would certainly think so. Now, the thing with sprinklers is, in a big block of flats like that, you would expect to be able to contain a fire within just a few flats, because it's made of steel and concrete, and the fire can't get through necessarily more than maybe just to one neighbouring flat. So a massive sprinkler system isn't necessarily necessary, but a fire alarm certainly is. You know, I think the culture of privatisation, the culture of deregulation here in Britain, where actually, I mean, we've seen the banks doing this, committing massive crimes, money laundering, LIBOR fraud, and it's only the little guys like Tom Hayes, one of the traders, that go to jail, the directors, the executives, the ones on the fat cat pay never go to jail. And that's why I think it's quite right for David Lammy to call for corporate manslaughter charges, because there's certainly been bending of the rules. There's also gentrification and ethnic cleansing going on in that part of London, round Ladbroke Grove. The local people are absolutely incredibly angry because they know that this is actually what the rich and powerful at Kensington and Chelsea Council want. They want these old council buildings where there's a lot of the poorer people living in them. They want them demolished to make way for luxury flats, which then the people who are living in those pay much more in taxes, and they also vote Tory. So this whole issue has been brought out. In a way, it's dramatised some of the issues from the general election last week in the most stark form. And it's interesting because the media haven't been dealing with a lot of these issues, haven't been tackling them in London. Things like the ethnic cleansing, they haven't been dealing with them anywhere near enough and putting ministers on trial. And that's one of the reasons I think that people have gone to the BBC to protest, because they are part of it. They're trying to manage rather than reflect public opinion in Britain.
That's exactly what I was going to lead me to my last and final question was, why do you think, I mean, is it that people are blasting the BBC protesters, that they're not being critical enough of authorities the way they're handling this?
They're definitely not. Now look at the most recent chair of the BBC's name's Rona Fairhead. She was on the risk committee of HSBC Bank. Now, you know, these are the kinds of people, criminal bank, by the way, these are the kinds of people the BBC needs to be investigating. And of course, people like her are put there, usually by, I mean, the Conservatives over the last few years, in order to stop investigations into criminality at the highest level. And I think that we've really got to ask serious questions about the sorts of contracts that have been awarded here. The other thing is you've got arm's length. Everything's at arm's length. The government owns, the local authority owns this tower block, but there's the tenant management organisation is managing it. That's one arm's length. Another arm's length is the contract to refit the building, and then yet another arm's length is this company, Harvey Facades, that put these flammable insulation around the building, which was effectively just to make it look nice. Not acceptable at all. And these are the sorts of issues which people like the BBC should be tearing the government apart on, and they're simply not, because the higher management of the BBC is in bed with the people that are making money out of privatisation and these arm's length companies. I mean, we've seen the guy Ray Bailey, who's in charge of this Harvey Facades company, making an absolute fortune and having a laugh with us, really, because when one of his previous companies went bust, he just simply sold the assets to another company, leaving people, he was owing them £1 million, but he used a little trick just so he didn't have to pay them. These are the people that are winning in this modern society, and that's why I mentioned this is actually like dramatising this recent election. And Jeremy Corbyn has done much better than Theresa May. She's in government, but many people are saying she's not in power.
Antonio, if this was that was actually my last question, but let me just lie and say, ask you one more question. In less than a minute, if you can, really quick. Had this been a building, one of those multi-million-pound buildings that face this Grenfell Tower, would the response have been different by authorities, you think?
Well, first of all, I think that all of the fire precautions would have been in place. We're hearing from some of the survivors, for example, that because of problems with parking at the ground level, that bollards have been put in so that the fire engines, the fire brigade, couldn't move properly around the base of the building. This is just appalling management. It's the management by people who are just trying to cut costs all the time. They're not professional. And when you've got very wealthy people living somewhere, they always make sure that all the boxes are checked and ticked because there's lots more money slushing around. I'm afraid we need to have standards for everybody. And this is what many of the crowds today in London are saying, very basic standards for everyone. And this does look as if it's just been neglected. Well, it has been neglected. It's quite obvious it has, because the people are poor, that they're being treated appallingly. In fact, they're being ignored by people who are supposed to be caring for them. And that's why people are not upset so much as angry, because all the warning signs have been there for years.
Thanks for joining us, Tony. It's Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, joining us out of London.